last week I told you I didn't really feel like giving a Dharma talk. I don't really feel like engaging the craziness of the world. This week, I really don't want to do a Dharma talk, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway with the promise to myself that either this would be the last Dharma talk, or I'll come back next week and start talking about Buddha's teaching again. And perhaps with Heart Sutra, perhaps talk about why 5 skandhas are empty. But with that promise, I think that I will continue with today's Dharma talk, which is really not about Dharma. It's about empowerment. So I talk about how it is important that we treat this time that we have together not only as a boot camp, where we train our mind, train our body, train to understand our emotions, and ultimately for our spiritual health, but understand that it's also a forum and a gathering place, a town square, where we can share our common experience in how to empower ourselves. Empower ourselves so that we don't become victims. That's what the other side wants to do. Both left and right. Both left and right want you to become victims. And we don't want that. We don't want to be victimized, but we also don't want to feel like we're victims. We want to empower ourselves. So last week, I had this thought, after class, I had this thought that, hey, it's time to talk about how to empower ourselves as consumers. And of course, I had in mind Tesla and Elon Musk. And I don't have problem with Trump being our president because he was elected. He was not only elected, he was popularly elected. I have to accept that this, ironically, is still a democracy. Now, what he does, once he's in power, destroying the democracy, that's something else. But at least he was elected. Elon Musk was not elected. And I talk about how the billionaires, the multi-billionaires, they ran out of things to do. They ran out of toys. And so they're now treating us as the toys. They're now trying to run this country the way they think is right for them. This is the playground. This is a playground, and they're controlling everything. So the only thing that we can control now is money, is our consumer habit. So there's a lot of talk about making English as the official language, the common language. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. I think we should have English as the official language. We should have it as a common language. We can have our own language. I speak Cantonese, I can speak Mandarin. One of my friends speaks Spanish. That reflects the culture, the heritage. I'm all for that. I'm all for having English as a common language, except I already think that we have a common language. America has a common language. It's called money. And so last week I talked about how Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, went to Martin Luther King to try to plead with him the insanity of the Vietnam War, and let Martin Luther King understands that his struggle to bring equality to the people of color should be fought as an economic battle. As an economic battle. And so he was the one that says, hey, there's injustice here because all the rich kids were able to get exams because they can afford to go to college. All the poor kids, especially the black kids, they don't have money to go to college, so they end up being drafted and they die in a senseless war. So he was able to turn money into the common language and turn his struggle into a struggle for the people and not just for the colored people. You know that we do work at the prison. All the donations that I collected on behalf of Venerable De Hong, who spent his life working in the prison, bringing Dharma, bringing compassion and loving kindness to those who are incarcerated. Not the freedom from the cell, from the physical incarceration, but the freedom from their spiritual incarceration, that they are also prisoner of their own emotion, their own fear, their own hate, their own whatever. And it was a struggle. Everybody who did that, not just anybody, everybody who tried to do that at the prison was a struggle until they can turn it into an economic issue. That for every person who, if it was sentenced 25 to life, it means that they have already served 25 years. They are eligible for parole. And by bringing Dharma to them, teaching them how their mind works, how the emotion works, and how perhaps they were, a lot of it was because of the trauma they suffer from as a child, because the trauma that the parents suffer from the war and whatever, and they're able to address internally their own wrongdoing. And so when they go to the parole board, they have a very high chance of succeeding the parole, and they were able to get released. For every prisoner that was released, that's $110,000 per year that the state doesn't have to pay. That's one. The other one is that for those who are elderly person, they're entering into hospice. And that's very expensive. And so by allowing them to address their inner anger, understanding all that, they were able to get released, again saving the prison's board money. And finally, 60% of those who are released end up back in the prison. Recidivism is very high among inmates. Those who were taught Buddhist meditation, 0% recidivism. They were able to leave and stay out. That's a lot of money. That's $110,000 per inmate per year. So by turning into an economic issue, that was our common language. We were able to speak to those who were in power. I remember in 1971 when I came to the United States, everybody smoked. And those who don't smoke, they smoke together. Everybody smoked. They smoke in theaters. They smoke in restaurants. They smoke in bus. They smoke in their workplace. It was hard to fight smoking because smoking was considered a personal liberty until someone decided that there is such thing as secondhand smoke. So once again, they were able to turn that into an economic issue. That it was not just the person's freedom to smoke, but by smoking, he actually intrudes on others and bring a financial burden to the society. Not to himself, but to everyone. Again, something that we can turn into our common language, the language of money. And finally, last week, I talked about DEI. And so I believe that, well, first of all, we have to rebrand it. Don't call it DEI anymore. But whatever it is we do, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is as much of America as anything else. And we need to kind of, again, bring it into the general public. Okay, so all of that is to say that however powerless you feel, that our government is now controlled by gangsters. I mean, let's not beat around the bush. These are gangsters. Everything to them is transactional. They want Panama Canal because one of the Bradwell, one of the private equity, wants the port. He decided that he would invade Panama if they don't give it up. They now want the mineral in Ukraine. It's not the United States that want the mineral. It's their buddy that wants the mineral, right? They're trying to do the same thing. These are gangsters. They're worse than gangsters. But in any case, they control everything. But yet, we control something. We control our purse. We control our consumptions. So last week, after the talk, I said, I'm going to talk about that. And talk about how we could boycott Tesla and pull the rug under Elon Musk. Now, I actually did that. I actually did that back in October 25th. Even before the election, even I knew which side is going to go. I always thought that it was Kamala was going to win. There's no way that Trump's going to win. But I decided that I didn't like Elon Musk. I didn't like what he stands. I didn't like what he was trying to do. and I sold all my Tesla stock. I sold it at $268. Now, since Trump was elected, the stock went up to $480. That's 80% increase. So on paper, I could have made a lot more money if I didn't make that position. But I thought, hey, you know, I do what I want to do. It's what I want to do. I explained to my wife, she supported me, sold all my Tesla stock. Now, I didn't check today, but on Friday, it went down to $248. So it actually went down 50% from the peak. So you can say, yeah, that was the right choice, but it was my choice. Now, that was Sunday. I was thinking about that, thinking that, hey, you know, maybe I should talk about that and just kind of make sure that everybody don't feel that they're a victim, because they still have some power. And little did I know that when comes Monday, everything crashed. Everything crashed, including Tesla stock crashed crazy. It just crashed crazy. So just to tell you how much money was lost because people want to give up their Tesla. And so I look it up. Elon Musk owns 410 million shares, which is about 13% of Tesla. At the peak, it was worth 197 billion. He lost half of that just because we decided not to buy his cars anymore. So you might say, well, but he still have a lot left. How's that going to hurt him? Well, what you don't know is that 1/3 of his Tesla stocks are serving as collateral. So you remember back in 2023, he bought Twitter. At first, he wanted to buy it, and then he didn't want to buy it, and then he was forced to buy it because he already signed the agreement. So he ended up borrowing a lot of money from the bank, and the bank uses his Tesla stock as collateral. And you know what's going to happen when Tesla stock drop to a threshold is that the bank is going to recall his loan. And that's why he panicked. He panicked to the point that he turned our president into a car salesman. That was funny. That was ironic. I think one way to understand our economy is to understand it in terms of a pyramid. So you have one pyramid where the top is very small and the bottom is very wide. And then you have another pyramid, which is an inverted pyramid. Very few people at the top owns a lot of wealth. A lot of people in the bottom together owns very little wealth. That's what's happening today. That 1%, just 1% at the top of the pyramid owns 30% of the wealth, the inverted pyramid. The bottom 50% only owns 2.6%. The top 10% of the household are now responsible for 50% of the consumer spending. So if you are working poor, I don't think there is much economic power you have, but there's a whole bunch of us who are kind of in the middle. We're not the 1%, we're not the multi-billionaire. So this is how it's divided. What is the 1%? 1% is anyone who has a net asset of about $13 million. Some of them has much more than that, but that's the threshold. What is 5%? 5% are those who has a net asset of 2.5 million. That's most of us. If you live in San Francisco, you just the value of your house is at least half or more of that. So you're getting close. 10% are those who have a net assets of money. That's all of us who own a house. Now, obviously, just because you own a house doesn't mean you have a lot of money spending, but that's the point. That's the point. So in other words, if you're the working poor, you don't actually have that much room. But if you think that you're middle class or even upper middle class, you have a lot of power in terms of how you choose to spend. So first you wanted to do is look at the top 10 wealthiest person in the world, and you make your choice. Because each one of those wealthy person, each one of those billionaires, their money was not printed. Their money was earned by your spending. Number one is Elon Musk. He owns Tesla, he owns Twitter, he owns SpaceX. I'm not buying his stock. I'm not even buying his car. And if I have a friend who buys his car, I tell him to sell it. If I have a friend who wants to buy an electric car, I tell him not to buy a Tesla. Boycott the asshole. The second wealthiest man is Facebook. Facebook is evil. Mark Zuckerberg had a meeting with Trump, and the first thing he did was that he removed all the fact-checking in his website. Facebook is evil. Now, I have no choice. I have to post my video on Facebook. I don't click on the ad. They're an advertising company. I don't click on the ad. If I see something I like, I go and I do a search separate from Facebook. Number 3 is Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. I have to use Amazon. I don't particularly think that Amazon is evil, but Jeff Bezos owns Washington Post. I don't subscribe to Washington Post, but neither do I read I can read the free version. I don't click on the ad. Number 4 is someone who owns Louis Vuitton. He's the only person who's not American. After that, you have Larry Ellison, Bill Gates. Bill Gates is not particularly evil. Warren Buffett, he's okay with he's my buddy. Larry Page, who's the co-founder of Google, and then also Sergey Brin. Now, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, they're retired, they don't do all much. On the other hand, Sergey Brin actually went out and says he's gonna donate all his personal wealth to Elon Musk. And number 10 is Steve Ballmer, who owns Microsoft. But anyway, you look at the list, and then there's another list, I don't want to repeat it, are the 10 billionaires who support Trump, people who are now Secretary of Department of Education, who's a grandson of Andrew Mellon, of the Carnegie Mellon. These are very rich people. Their wealth comes from inheritance. Not much we can do. Most of them are not really in the consumer business, except the last one, which owns Circus and Circus. So if I go to Las Vegas, I'll stay away from that. The point is, don't feel like you are a victim. You have power. Speak the language of this country, which is money. Use your spending as your power.